Hello everyone, welcome to video 16. The name of this video is there an English teaching method for everyone? An applied linguistics perspective. So in this video, we'll be discussing the three main views for language. The cognitive view, the so-called mechanistic view, and the social-cultural view, and how we'll be exploring how our definition for languages may impact the way we teach. So let's begin with this scenario, with this context, okay? Let's imagine you attend a conference, okay? And then in that particular conference, one presenter says, the communicative language teaching is the answer. Another says, the task-based learning is the future. And then another one, the third one, argues technology will transform language education. And then someone asks, so which method is the best? Applied linguistics has an interesting answer. Probably none of them. Okay, let's have a look at today's competency, okay, and what you will be learning in this video. In this video, you will be critically evaluating language teaching methods and selecting pedagogical practices that respond to your learners' needs, context, and your students' learning preferences. So for more than a century, language teaching, language learning, applied linguists, experts in the field have searched for what we may say the perfect method. Then you may be familiar with different methods for language learning. The so-called the direct method, you probably know the silent way, the audiolingualism, the communicative language teaching, the task-based learning, the dogme approach. We also know about recently, and we know about technology-enhanced learning. But what if there is no perfect method? What if effective teaching is not about following one approach, one trend in language learning or teaching, but about understanding learners? If that's your view, then let's begin. Okay, so imagine you ask 100 language teachers the following. What is the best method for teaching English? You will probably receive 100 different words. Some teachers will probably advocate communication. Others will advocate explicit grammar instruction. Others will focus on technology. Others will emphasize interaction. Others will claim that the functional approaches are the best, the competency-based approaches. We've heard of different methods, approaches, techniques. We've heard about now post methods. We've heard about eclecticism. We know about the dogme approach. But who's right? That's the key question here. And my answer is perhaps all of them, perhaps none of them. It depends. And so I will be sharing now a quotation, okay, a citation from David Noonan, which is actually my favorite ever. Okay, and it's a key insight from applied linguistics. This quotation says, it has been realized that there never was and probably never will be a method for all. And the focus in recent years has been on the development of classroom tasks and activities which are consonant with what we know about second language acquisition and which are also in keeping with the dynamics of the classroom itself. I actually know it by heart because it's my favorite quotation ever. So what David Noonan is saying here is there never was, probably there never will be a method for everyone to fulfill everyone's needs. So the focus now, well, this is from 1991, and he was claiming at that time that the focus should be on selecting appropriate classroom activities or tasks that can help students learn the language and that are backed up with what we know or with the rationale behind language teaching or learning. So in order to achieve this, because this statement changed how many scholars build language teaching and how, well, and why is this relevant? Because learners are different, okay? Teachers are different, contexts are different, goals are different as well. So a strategy that works brilliantly in one classroom may fail completely in another. So I always encourage my students, and then I encourage when I'm training EFL teachers and in teacher education as well, I encourage the students to firstly reflect on their own definition for language and their own definition for language learning. Much of what you declare and much or the way you define languages and the way you define language learning or language teaching, those your own definitions will explicitly mention and will impact the way you teach the language. So applied linguistics has proposed three different ways of understanding how languages are learned. let's explore the three main dimensions, okay? So the three stances of language learning are the mechanistic view, the cognitive view, and the social-cultural view. The mechanistic view defines language and language learning as a habit formation. The cognitive view defines language and language learning as a mental process. So yes, repeating is fine, interacting with others is fine, which has to do with the social cultural perspective that claims that learning and language is a social art, as a cultural and social artifact, and that you learn it through social interaction. Cognitive, for instance, cognitive and cognitive, people who adhere to the cognitive view may believe that the other two dimensions are fine, but finally learning happens in your head, in your brain, and that's the key essential aspects, okay? Social cultural view means, yes, cognitive processes, repeating, learning habits, developing your habits, and memorizing a list of words and vocabulary from L1 to L2. That's fine, you can do it. But in the end, what's best is using the language to interact with others. So here you have the main claims or assumptions or constructs behind each dimensions. The mechanistic views aims at repetition, learning things by heart, reinforcement, negative or positive reinforcement, or what we call negative or positive feedback. The cognitive view has to do with noticing, processing information, organizing ideas in your head. The sociocultural view, in contrast, believes that communication, collaboration, participation, role plays are essential to learn a language. Okay, so the mechanistic view will be good, for example, when it has to do with pronunciation, automaticity, beginners. The cognitive view has a lot to do with understanding, making sense of what you're reading, autonomy, problem solving, and then coming up with patterns in language learning. The social cultural view, in contrast, has to do with authentic communication, collaboration, and with what we know real world languages. So all approaches that have to do with, as you know, competency-based, task-based learning, has to do with the social cultural view. You have here well-known authors like the cognitive views. You can connect that with Chomsky's ideas, and then social cultural views, which you've got Vygotsky and some others. Okay, so um, so the negative aspect, for example, with the mechanistic view is like there is limited meaning, limited communication. From the cognitive point of view, there's less social interaction. And from the social cultural view, some learners need more structure. So although you will be fostering and encouraging them to communicate in the target language, they will need something, and they may consider that the lessons are maybe a waste of time because they are just speaking, chatting, and they are not learning anything. So that's why teachers may and must be careful with this. I think that there is truth in virtually the three dimensions. And here you have an example of how the class structures or objectives are declared in the classroom. So for example, from a mechanistic point of view, to accurately use past tense forms through practice. The same language competency, the classroom objective from the cognitive point of view would be to identify patterns between regular and irregular verbs. So patterns are necessary from the cognitive point of view. And from a social cultural point of view, your lesson may be focusing on or your students will be able to communicate past experiences through interaction. Here you have examples of how the activities are implemented in the classroom from the three umbrella perspectives. For example, activity, well, repeat after me, I went to school. This is very popular and common in EFL schools in Chile, for example. Since the students, enter the classroom, they have the repeats, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, etc. And they are fostering repetition. Activity, analyze verbs, walk, walked, go, went, see, so. That has to do with analyzing in context. If you have your students analyze a short passage and identify actions and the past tenses and making connections in a story, you are asking them to make a cognitive effort to make sense of what they are reading. And in contrast, you have the social cultural view, role play. What do you do last weekend? Okay, you will usually provide the students with chants such as, I really enjoyed it, we had a great time, I'd love to do it again. But then the issue here is that most of the time, you will have students asking you questions such as, what is that apostrophe? What does D mean? Is it had or would? I really enjoyed it. I remember I implemented a full social cultural and functional class in the past, in which I had the students repeat chants such as, can I have, would you like? Because the institution I was working for asked me to do that. And then by the end of the lesson, I had 3 out of 20 students who approached me and said, so how do you say, would you like in Spanish? How do you say, can I have in Spanish? Although they used the classroom, although they interacted, although they negotiated meaning, although I was very happy because the class had been 100% English and 100% communicative, 3 out of 20 students didn't really catch the meaning of would you like to, although they made connections with would you like a cup of coffee to offer, and then can I have to request, and they made those connections, and they had all the answers correct and all the activities from the textbook and from the role plays, and they actually performed in front of the class. They still needed structure. They still needed the Spanish version. They still needed to know the meaning of would you. They hadn't really grasped would you, neither would you nor can I. And I had to, of course, take time to explain that to those 3 students. So what is this saying? Well, this is a practical classroom example. The mechanistic view, the objective to produce accurate past tense forms. Activity, repetition, and drilling, and the focus is on accuracy. Cognitive, the cognitive view made an objective defined, and then if you come up with an objective with this pattern, like notice patterns between regular and irregular verbs, there the activity will be intended to have the students discover grammar by means of a task. From a social cultural view, the same objective, which has to do with talking about past experiences, will be declared as use the past tense in authentic communication. And you will probably come up with weekend role plays conversations. Okay. As I said, here's the interesting part. Okay, if you have a look at Booker, now you have an EFL teacher reflecting on my English teaching practices, or TC English teaching practices. So if you are an EFL teacher now watching this video, I encourage you to reflect on how you teach the language. Probably you may believe that your lessons are 100% communicative and functional, but then if you come to the board and you have them make connections with words, or if you come out with a grammar explanation, then your class will be focusing on the 3 dimensions, and there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, so for example, in this picture, this particular teacher is reflecting on the amount of student interaction in the classroom, what worked well, what didn't work properly. So meaningful learning, challenges, new ideas. So here's the interesting part. In my opinion, there is truth in all the 3 perspectives. Why? Well, essentially because the students need practice, they need understanding, they need interaction. The problem begins when we assume that only one perspective is correct. We shouldn't assume that. Like, applied linguistics increasingly suggests that language learning is too complex to be explained by a single theory. So we shouldn't be assuming that students will be grasping language through just role plays or videos, or by being exposed to video. We should plan our lessons in such a way that we could help them. And that's why I really like David Noonan's quotation, and it's actually my favorite, because what he's saying is stop thinking about methods, stop thinking about the best methodology, and instead start thinking about how to fulfill your students' needs and how to help your students by means of implementing activities that are encouraging, motivating, so they can improve their language competencies. So I always see English language teaching as a catering service, as you can see in the picture. Imagine you are organizing now a large event. Your guests include vegetarians, vegans, meat eaters, gluten-free guests, people with allergies. Would you serve exactly the same meal to everyone? Of course not. You would probably offer options. And teaching has a lot to do with that. Teaching should work the same way, because we encounter different learners who have different needs, we have different learners who have different preferences, and we have different learners that benefit from different forms of support. So we should be ready to help them all. So teaching is like a catering service, if you put it in that way, because we have different menu options, different learners, different pedagogical choices, and different learning outcomes. But a good EFL teacher should be familiar with the main rationale. So that's why I always start my applied linguistic lessons and courses. When I'm lecturing, of course, I have my students reflect on their own definition for languages and their own definitions for language learning, because the way you define the process and then this phenomenon, because language can be a social phenomenon, a mental phenomenon, okay, or a mechanistic phenomenon, depending on how you see it. So if it is from the first perspective, you will define language as a set of rules. So of course, in your classroom, you will have the students memorize rules. If you believe that it is a mental process, you will have your students to mentally read, analyze text, think about how the language is used in context, come up with patterns, associate patterns as they start learning the language. And if you believe that language is a social phenomenon, then you will have your students use the language to fulfill real life tasks, okay, and complete those tasks properly. In one specific platform, we can see practices that combine the three of them carefully. Okay, you may be pre-teaching key vocabulary, then they make connections with pictures, flashcards, and then they come out with an imaginary situation in which they need to use the key vocabulary chunks and expressions. And at the end, you give proper feedback, and then you wrap up and complete your lesson. So a class, a good teacher should be prepared to teach the three. Why is this essential? Well, this is a real experience, okay? Although I generally adhere to the communicative approaches to language teaching, and I usually combine the three dimensions, I recently worked with the students in her 60s, and many communicative activities that work well with younger learners did not fulfill and didn't meet her expectations. So she wanted structure, clear explanations. She wanted guided practice, written support, and opportunities for review. That was her preferred learning style. So what did I have to do? I adapted it. So I provided structured materials. She completed autonomous work at home. And then we reviewed and discussed the contents together during lessons, aiming at communication. So at the end of the day, she could communicate, but she needed all these pre-elaborated face examples, explanations, rules, because that's the way she felt she was learning and making progress. And in a way, she did. Now, the question is, was that purely communicative? No. Was it effective? Absolutely, because teaching should respond to learners, not to ideologies. Now, reflection for teachers. If you are a teacher watching this video, perhaps the most important question here is not what is the best method, but rather, what does this particular learner need? Excellent teachers do not blindly follow methods. Excellent teachers make informed, and this is probably what I want you to take away from the videos. Excellent teachers make informed pedagogical decisions. You are the expert. And if you are familiar with the three dimensions, with the theory behind language learning, with the three stances and perspectives, then you will have different options in which the learning outcome of the lesson can be implemented, the type of methodology should be adapted. So teachers, excellent teachers select, excellent teachers adapt their materials, their methodologies, excellent teachers combine if necessary, excellent teachers modify if necessary, and excellent teachers respond to the learners. Okay, so that's something essential. Now, food for researchers. Okay, if you've enjoyed this video and if you are still searching for the best way or a perfect way to teach the language, I encourage you to come up with these questions and probably come up with good research projects. So the first question is, why do some learners prefer highly structured instruction? How do HR learning history influence methodological preferences? Can communicative and explicit instruction coexist effectively? How much individualization is realistically possible in language classrooms? And the last but not the least, should future language teaching move beyond methods altogether? So this is a sort of a spoiler, but in the next video, we'll be talking about the chaos and complexity theory, a theory that discards all these three stances and that suggests something completely controversial and completely brand new when it has to do with language learning. I invite you to watch the following video to explore more about this theory that has been traditionally applied to biology, mathematics, and how that's applied to second language learning or acquisition. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, the history of our profession has been dual and cyclical. And I would like to finish by mentioning that. Okay, so the history of our profession has been dual and cyclical. Dual. What does it mean? That we have moved back and forth like a pendulum from the mechanistic view to the social cultural view, assuming that we are making progress. Okay, and later on, to realize later on that other practices needed to be reconsidered. As I mentioned with the example here, like if your class is 100% functional and communicative, you may have students, some of your students struggling with rules or structures. If it is 100% mechanistic, you will be hindering communication. You will be preventing your students from speaking and using the language effectively in the classroom. So you must be careful with your decisions. So it's better to be familiar with all ideas, because think about the best teacher you've ever had. Was that person successful because they followed a particular method or because they understood the students? I want you to reflect on this, on these two questions, okay? These are the references that I have used to prepare this video for you. And remember, perhaps the question is not which perspective is correct. Perhaps the question is when, why, and for whom each perspective is most useful. Effective teachers know how to combine all three. If you've liked this video, I invite you to like it, subscribe it, and join the upcoming sessions and the next video that will be about one of my favorite theories. It's a contemporary theory that is called the chaos and complexity theory applied to language teaching and learning. Bye, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next video.